Jesus has been talking to anyone who will listen about a new kingdom of peace and plenty that he says he's about to found. And sooner or later, this talk is bound to provoke an obvious follow-up question. Okay, Jesus, that sounds great, but how exactly is this global revolution of yours going to go down? We've all seen enough movies to have some idea of what a revolution looks like. There are usually lots of weapons and secret kings. There are grizzled men on horses and dramatic sacrifices. Everything culminates in an apocalyptic battle. And when the sun finally creeps over the horizon, everyone on the blood-soaked field can see a new world has been born. As you can tell, I can't get enough of these stories. Their call to courage and sacrifice gets to me every time. I dream of being part of an epic story that will change everything. I want to claw my way up Mount Doom in bloody clothes to save the world. And then into my fantasy steps Jesus, who tells his followers, "You all should picture my revolution as a baker baking bread or a gardener planting seeds." Talk about a buzzkill. Every time I read this, my heart sinks a little. My grandmother was a professional baker, and her pies were top-notch. But there isn't anything I can think of that's less epic than a grandmother's kitchen. Also, do you all know how long it takes bread dough to rise? I made croissants once just to check it off my list, and I died twice from sheer impatience. No offense to Jesus and his revolution, but it sounds like he's confusing Braveheart with midnight PBS. But Jesus is fully aware we're all looking for Chris Hemsworth with a sword and or a hammer to lead us into battle. He's using the least epic objects imaginable to make a point about how little our stories have prepared us for the actual shape of the revolution that God is throwing down. We've been taught to look for revolution in palaces and capitals. God's revolution is coming from kitchens and cornfields. We've been told to look for leadership from generals and scholars. God's revolution is often fronted by farmers and stay-at-home moms. We expect that a movement that matters will fill the streets and dominate the headlines. God's revolution is measured in increments so small we wouldn't notice if they stuck to the bottom of our socks. We expect a movement that God backs will accelerate like a rocket launch. God's revolution multiplies so slowly and so subtly that anyone who's looking too close will swear nothing is happening at all. As someone who wants that world of peace and plenty, I used to worry that Jesus' revolution had failed. What other explanation could there be for the fact that every warrior and hero I know seems to fall off his horse head first? Every attempt to make things better feels like running sand dunes in high heels. Institutions move toward change like a drowsy three-legged turtle. I felt frustrated to the point of despair. But then I met a 93-year-old who went to the grocery store every week to spend his limited income on whatever was running short at the food pantry. I met a woman who subscribed to a medical journal for a disease she didn't have so she could better understand the experience of her neighbors. I met 2 teachers who invited a student to move into their house so she could make it through high school. I met a retiree who'd made it his personal mission to help a violent offender find a second chance in the world. I met a man who was once known for storming out of rooms in anger, who was studying conflict resolution to learn the skills how to change. All of these people were already living in a small radius right around me. One day as I was reading about yeast and seeds, it finally registered. The revolution was happening right in front of me. I just hadn't recognized it. A few specks of yeast seemed like nothing when weighed against the rest of the dough. Yet through some mysterious, to most of us, alchemy, the presence of these tiny specks radically changes the outcome of the whole. This, Jesus says, is how his movement will operate. Jesus isn't naive. He doesn't think that a few good deeds, left on their own to grow naturally, will remake the whole world. What he's suggesting is that small acts in out-of-the-way places, when they're infused with the power of God, can ripple outward with impacts that none of us foresee. If that sounds hard to believe, consider the story so far. Jesus himself took on 12 rather mediocre apprentices. He spent most of his time movement building in small rural villages among fishermen and housewives. When his short life came to a sudden end, any objective observer would have declared his movement dead. Yet 2,000 years later, when the empire that ruled his world with an iron fist is in a museum, Jesus' movement is still going billions strong. I used to hate the talk about yeast and seeds. Now it gives me hope. Jesus' revolution wasn't built for the headlines. It's never demanded majorities or masses. It's never required warriors or princes or superheroes. It will be normal people's small daily acts of courage and generosity and mercy and sacrifice that will make the difference. Even a few small specks of yeast, infused with the alchemy of God's presence, can cause the whole loaf around them to rise. Let's read what Jesus says in Luke 13, beginning in verse 18. Then Jesus said, "What is the kingdom of God like? How can I illustrate it? It's like a tiny mustard seed that a man planted in a garden. It grows and becomes a tree, and the birds make nests in its branches." He also asked, "What else is the kingdom of God like? It is like yeast a woman used in making bread. Even though she put only a little yeast in 3 measures of flour, it permeated every part of the dough." I'm Megan Larissa Good, and this has been Reading Jesus. Thanks so much for joining me for a few minutes in Luke, and I'll see you next time.